Okay, so we are in the cameras off mode with a little construction and how fitting for this week, talking about the cargo. And we want to focus on accepting your heart. Now, in the inner sailboat metaphor, of course, we talk about different areas of the sailboat and what it means in life. That's why it's a metaphor. So every sailboat carries cargo, right? And some of it is useful when we talk about the tools, the wisdom, and some of those memories that keep us going in life. But some of it is also heavy or outdated. Some of it is even hidden, right? So in life, our cargo represents our beliefs, our emotional imprint, and stories that we are internalizing, especially the ones that we didn't consciously choose. Those are the things that we inherit, the way that we are conditioned, right? Whether it be by family members or the media, right? The societies that we live in, the communities that we live in. So, just want to welcome everyone to session 5 in the inner sailboat metaphor, where we're looking at our beliefs, our stories, and those emotional loads to recognize what we're carrying with us and consider moving into a space of release for what's appropriate for us to let go of, right? Whether that be the narratives, the stories, whether they be practices, but the things that no longer fit, right? So we may be releasing things that we inherited, but are not choosing to take ownership of anymore. And this session is the start of the conversation, not the solution to all that is going on. Okay, so we'll talk about some of the tools in our toolbox that we may be familiar with, things that we may want to explore. But it's important to understand that it is also a process, and it's important to be patient with that process and to be compassionate with yourself, right? Employ some compassion. Um, where you are, it didn't come to be overnight. So it's only fair that you recognize that being comfortable with being your authentic self is going to be a process as well. All right, so let's get into it. The cargo, accepting your heart. Now, every one of us carries something hard. It might look different to each of us, whether those are our relationships, how we struggle, the financial pressure that we have, grief or loss, personal growth. But all of that cargo is heavy when it's our own to carry. And there's a quote that says, "Life is not easy, choose your hard," right? To be unhealthy or overweight, right? Out of shape, that has some difficulties that come with it. To get into the gym or do some type of exercise routine, have body movement, that may be hard as well. But they each have their hard and they each have different consequences or reward, right? So, it's easy to find this quote very true because every path is going to have some type of challenge. But rather than comparing which heart is heavier, our resilience comes from accepting our own heart with grace, with compassion, and with awareness. Okay, so the question isn't, is what I'm going through, is what's happening to me, is it harder than what you're going through, right? It's about how am I able to carry what's mine and carry that with wisdom and with love, right? So every journey carries weight. Our power is in how we carry it. Are we able to have acceptance for some things? Are we able to integrate some things? Do we feel like things are burdensome for a reason? Or do we get caught up with those comparisons and then understanding how each of those things affect our journey, whether we're dealing with marriages, losses, divorces, debt, conflict, discipline, trauma, growth, or even healing, right? Because I keep talking about that, how growth and healing also carries a level of difficulty, a level of discomfort, because getting pushed out of your comfort zone is a level of healthy stress that moves us toward change. So let's talk about something that often shapes how we perceive our heart. right? Access to certain tools and resources. When we look at other people's cargo, their relationships, their success, their healing, we often imagine that it might be easier to go through what they're going through, easier to deal with what they're dealing with, right? Than to carry what we're dealing with, to deal with whatever's going on in our own lives. But what we're really seeing is just their surface, right? And a lot of times that surface has to do with what we want to see. I've talked about this before where I might be driving a Cadillac, right? And that may be a sign of wealth or doing good for someone else, but it may not be the car that I wanted, right? So when I talk about seeing what's on someone else's surface, it's the same thing. We don't see the weight of what the individual is carrying because we don't have the same goals. We see what that person has accomplished on our goal list, not even recognizing that their goal list is not the same as ours. So where we see relief in their situation, it does not mean that they are not carrying heavy weight in their situation, right? So we get in this thinking or this thought process that someone else's journey looks easier because of their resources. But we see that because the resources they have would be beneficial in our experience. Those resources are not necessarily something that they consider beneficial, right? So some people are going to therapy, some people have their faith, some people have families that they can use as resources and support. Others rely on maybe chosen family, right? Maybe they had to disconnect from some family members and establish new community. And some people still operate in solitude, right? I don't have any connections. I work better by myself. Some people have financial stability, and how we define financial stability is different for everyone. I was looking out, I think I mentioned Caleb Hammond before, but there was a couple on there, and they were making what we consider pretty decent money by United States, earning what families earn in the United States. And so it was about like, I think it was $10,000 a month or something like that. And the wife considered them being in a good financial place because, yes, they were spending $11,000 a month, but they had the money coming in to be able to pay. And then the husband was like, we can't overspend, or we shouldn't be spending all of our resources and not having an emergency fund. So how we determine financial stability is very different, right? And then other people may have resilience from growing up not having things or being without, right? They've learned different skills from having to manage with less. So we might look at someone who's in therapy, has a supportive family or strong finances, and think, oh, this must be easier for them. And maybe, yes, their access to those resources gives them certain advantages, right? But it's not about having the resources available. It is about how you use the resources, okay? So just because we have resources doesn't mean that our journey is going to be lesser. Like if we have a lack of resources, or if we have those resources, it doesn't mean that the growth is going to be less or more, right? We're all selling with these different tools. So one person's therapy might be another person's spiritual mentor. It might be someone else going to church and accessing, connections there. One person's family might be another's faith community or just a trusted friend, right? So this isn't about who has more, who has it easier, who has it harder. It's about how we use what we have and how we cultivate new tools we can use in our situation. So comparison is something that pulls us out of presence and into judgment, right? And judgment doesn't benefit us very much. Okay. When we're assessing a situation, that can be very beneficial. What it does is it keeps us from tending to our own boat. And so true resilience begins when we stop comparing cargo and start strengthening our capacity to carry our own. And when we want to take on additional cargo, right? If our vessel is not in a healthy place, our cargo is not being managed. How do we add additional cargo? How do we help others Okay, if we don't have a system that's supporting our own cargo, right? So I used to say, well, I still do say that same circus, different hoops. So I guess in the spirit of the metaphor for the sailboat, it would be different tools, same ocean, right? So every boat is still going to meet the waves. It's about how you're managing the waves, not what's going on with the other boats, right? So what truly matters is, are you willing to use the tools that are available to you? Because a lot of times resources are available, but we don't access those resources. Are you open to receiving support when it does appear? Do we have difficulty accepting help? That's important to know as well. That's where that self-awareness piece comes in, right? Can we value our path without comparing it to someone else's toolbox? Everyone has lessons that are meant for their path. So again, seeing things on the surface, you don't understand what's being built in that individual, what that person is being prepared for on their path, right? And so it doesn't mean that it's not difficult. It's just not for you. All right. Resilience isn't built by the number of tools that you have. It's built by how you work with what's in your hands. All right. So every tool, whether it's going to be practical, emotional, or spiritual, serves the same purpose. And that purpose is to help you steer your boat with more balance so that you don't sink, right? So you don't crash and burn. And so when we're talking about therapy, mindfulness, meditation, movement, body movement, prayer, affirmation, those are all ways of creating internal spaciousness to handle external stress, right? To be able to manage that cargo. Now, I know a lot of folk come to the meetings um, to find out, especially this open meeting, and there's a lot of questions about like how to do something. There's a lot of how. How do I practice self-love? What is it? How can I create healthy boundaries and so on and so forth? So I wanted to spell out some of the tools that I've explored in different like one-to-one talks with people over the years. And this is not even all of them, right? And it really, again, depends on your particular situation. So it's difficult to speak to something individualized in an open meeting like this. But I try to at least get a few tools out there because I like to um, kind of categorize everything. The options are endless. Again, it's not always that we don't know about those tools. Sometimes it's just that we don't see how the tools fit in our experiences. So we just simply don't use it, right? I think that categorizing the tools into practical, emotional, and spiritual also helps people see what tools are being used in their life, what tools are part of their story, right? Um, but it's not required to label the tools in any way. Um, it doesn't mean anything for the labels, okay? But the purpose of practical tools is to support like tangible stability, organization, things that have to do with daily structure. So that can deal with things like budgeting. Um, it can deal with things like time management, smart goals, right? How to um, do action plans, have actionable goals, maybe having reminders, maybe about organizing or decluttering, maybe going through coaching or therapy that's a practical tool. Creating a resilience plan, which is something that we're doing in the next section. Just seeking out job programs or community aid, using planners, right? Calendars and things like that, apps that can help us with self-organization. So those are some examples of practical tools. When we talk about doing the work in self-love and resilience, Then we can talk about boundaries and self-advocacy as something that is practical, learning to say no, asking for help when it's needed, knowing legal rights or workplace rights. Okay, so being able to communicate needs clearly and calmly is a space in growing practically. Then you have emotional tools, and the purpose of emotional tools is to be able to process, express, and regulate feelings, right? It's about emotional regulation without being consumed by them, right? Um, we look at more of integration practices. So some of those tools might be EFT. I've talked about that before. Having peer groups, um, a person that you can trust, that you can talk with, using visualization, music therapy, participating in art, um, some type of creative self-expression. We talked about the emotional will before, being able to identify and name those feelings. I've talked about somatic grounding, probably more so in the Facebook group. I'm going into more detail about that in those in different types of somatic practices, but journaling is something that I'm always mentioning in the meetings as well. And also practicing self-compassion, which is so important. Understanding that the journey that I'm on, it does feel heavy, it does feel hard, right? But also in this experience, I'm still worthy. All right. The cargo that I'm carrying does not affect the worth and the value of who I am as an individual. When we talk about those integration practices, we get into reflection, right? Reflection about triggers, and understanding that those triggers can also serve as invitations for growth. We get into being able to balance our vulnerability with also self-trust, right? Oftentimes, I talk to a lot of women, okay, but it seems that it goes on both ways. People don't trust themselves in choosing partners, right? And it's not about you don't trust yourself at choosing partners. It goes right back to the value, okay, of being. Who are you right now? And the things that you feel like you're capable to access or worthy of accessing, right? So we have to be able to affirm our emotional safety, understanding that it's okay to feel this and still be moving forward, right? I'm not deteriorating. I'm still growing. I'm still, am I becoming while I'm being? Sometimes that's very difficult to grasp and embody, but it's something that we can become comfortable with, right? It just has to be intentional. Um, and then we have our spiritual tools, which is to anchor in faith, and whether that be our religious practices. Um, More people participate in faith than think so, right? It doesn't even have to be a religious thing. It's about anchoring in our meaning, anchoring in a connection to something that's greater than what's happening in the immediate circumstance. And metaphysically, I talk about this on a one-to-one basis because, again, it depends on mindset and where you are in your thinking as to, where we need to start with that grasp. But there's just several ways that people uh, do that. So, despite doctrine and practices, I feel like I have the privilege of seeing people pursue the same goals in their spiritual, religious, and ritual practices, even though they may have different doctrines and different beliefs. It's actually been quite an eye-opening experience for me to see how those things are weaved together. But when we talk about, for me, when I talk about spiritual tools, a lot of times that's when I'm talking about reframing a lot with people. Um, Being able to like see the challenge in what we might call our soul curriculum, right? Or opportunities for awakening, becoming aware, that self-awareness. Using the metaphors with the growth cycles, maybe seasons, um, as I have grasped on here with that inner sailboat, but getting to that process of acceptance through those metaphors. when we are practicing surrender, right? So a lot of times, to me, spiritual tools like the meditation, prayer treatments and affirmations, again, that guided imagery, visualization. Some people do things with candle lighting or symbolic rituals for release, writing, excuse me, writing letters, right? Then burning those letters for release. Intuitive writing, breath work is something that's really good for breathing in peace, and exhaling resistance. Very effective for a lot of people. Um, Being immersed in nature or um, other practices of grounding. So when we're practicing that surrender, it's about releasing what I can't control, right? And moving into that space of acceptance. So different tools, and instead of comparing what tools we have, we can focus on expanding our awareness of what's available, right? And using those tools intentionally for um, our journey, our experience to address the weight that we're carrying. I want to leave this screen up a little bit so that you can actually see some of those tools. If you're watching the recording, I say wind it back. I'll probably post, maybe I'll just post this particular screen in the Facebook group. Okay. So all of our cargo serves a purpose, right? I like to talk metaphysically, especially one-on-one. But in metaphysical terms, every challenge that we carry is part of that curriculum, right? Those life lessons. So our cargo contains the experiences, our emotions, and the lessons that shape us in our being and our becoming, because we're doing both at the same time. And some cargo is meant to be released or unloaded, right? That's those old beliefs, that guilt that we're carrying, maybe resentment that we're carrying. Some cargo is meant to be examined, or we may go through that process of reflection, right? And a lot of times that can be about the stories that we tell about our past, the stories that we carry with our traumas, right? And then some cargo is just meant to be rearranged. How can we balance this responsibility that we have, right? How can we incorporate rest into our routine? How can we experience relief? Right? Even if that responsibility is continuing. Because sometimes maybe it's a family experience, and maybe sometimes that becomes frustrating or overwhelming. Well, that experience is not going to go away, right? We are the caregivers to our children, sometimes to our parents, sometimes to other family members, right? And we may carry some guilt about feeling frustrated in that situation, but that's something that's natural. That's something that's going to happen. What we need is a space to be able to release and rearrange and organize and balance that frustration, right? So that again, we don't become overwhelmed with that feeling, with that emotion. So this brings us to accepting our hard, right? So I want to give you an exercise to think of one area in your life that feels heavy right now, because there's always going to be hard, right? And so instead of resisting it or judging it, how can you lean into it or breathe into it? How can you balance it? How can you manage it? So the two questions that I'm posing, whether you are in the meeting live today, or just watching the recording, what is the heart teaching me about myself? What are you learning about yourself when you're dealing with this emotion, moving through this particular tool, trying to deal with this particular circumstance? What is it teaching you about yourself? And then how might this be strengthening my compassion, my patience, my courage, right? Those strengths on our journey. those things that we can grow in that can support us on our journey. Okay, because when we're able to take a look at how the compassion, the patience, and the courage is being strengthened, that's part of acceptance, right? Not having to surrender to the situation, not having, again, to be overwhelmed by it or, be in a space of resignation, but being able to recognize what's going on and recognize and identify our strengths and how our strengths can help us work through the situations that are hard for us. So the moment that we're able to stop fighting our hard, that is the moment that we can give some energy and focus to transforming it. But those are choices that we have to make, right? Those are actionable things that are going to be done. And avoidance is an action as well, right? And it doesn't mean that it's going to reduce our amount of hard or make it less difficult just because we avoid it. There's still going to be difficulty and hard involved in our avoidance, okay? So much of how we make decisions is based on how we feel about ourselves and about our self-worth, okay? What we feel we should be going through, what we feel we don't deserve, and then that plays into what we accept in our relationships, right? Whether we find value and the skills that we can offer to our families, to the people that we're connected to, even our employers. If our experiences are making us less worthy of love, less worthy of peace and reward. Sometimes even like if you're in the coaching business, the helping business, if you're a therapist, um, if you're in that business, it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience things in life that are hard. It doesn't mean that you're going to avoid experiencing grief or loss, right? So you will have to work through those things as well. Does it mean that you can't still be a therapist or a coach or in the helping profession? No, it doesn't mean that. So being there, having those real life experiences doesn't make what you're doing for others less valuable. It doesn't strip you of your being and who you are, right? It's about what you're teaching others. What are you also the student of those things, right? Making sure that you're also managing those things and balancing those things, making sure that you're also self-aware and identifying what tools you have to manage. Because being the helper is not going to exempt you from life's experiences, right? So we are not the weight, we're the vessel experiencing the weight. And with the tools that we have or that we become open to and that we cultivate, then we're able to manage that weight, balance that weight, release that weight. Okay. So it's important that we're able to remember that we're not the cargo. We're the vessel managing the cargo, the truth of who we are, right? Being whole, being knowledgeable about ourselves, knowing what we're capable of, that remains intact regardless of what we are carrying. And we're able to acknowledge that weight without identifying as it, right? Once we start to identify it, that's when it starts to affect our worth. That's when we may start to experience feeling less worthy of love or peace or reward. Okay. And that's where our healing needs to begin. So, not exempt, but don't forget your tools. Don't forget what's available to you. Don't forget your actionable steps. So, our affirmation for today is I honor the weight I carry and trust that it's shaping my strength. Okay. I am not my heart. I am the vessel that holds divine resilience. I am the vessel that holds resilience. So let's open up this discussion with a couple of reflection prompts, is what we're going to do. The first one is going to be, what story can I rewrite with compassion? Because what you say about your worth, about your ability, what you're thinking about your outcomes, those things become truth. Okay, they become what we see. And it's not about magically appearing or disappearing. It's more about the actions and commitment that are attached to the story that we are telling ourselves. If you don't believe you can, you won't, because you won't attempt anything, right? You won't take any action, and that will have its own results. You won't assign any energy or focus to it, right? So this also goes for not wanting to, making a choice that I just don't want to when I talked about avoidance. But again, we still have to manage the heart that comes with those decisions. They won't be without the heart. It will be stress that we can manage, stress that we we ignore, right? And all of that stress will still either we will use it to build or it will be used to destroy us. We have to make that choice. Now, that brings me to the second reflection prompt, which is how can I honor my hard without identifying as it? Okay, so what I'll do right now is just have us take a 5-minute intermission to think about the prompts. And if you need to get a drink or something, go ahead and do that. And then we'll come back after the 5-minute break and get into some discussion. For those individuals who are watching the recording, please feel free to use the reflection questions as a journal prompt today or this week while you're journaling. And then I'll see everyone next week for the resilience plan. But let me just give you those reflection prompts one more time. What story can I rewrite with compassion? That's the first one. And how can I honor my heart without identifying as it? So how can I separate myself from my cargo? Okay. See you guys next week.